All right, welcome back. So let's continue on in our inventory here and add the things that we need to create our inventory itself. Because right now we have all the logic, but we need to actually make the things. We need to make the nodes, and we need to add some helper functions. Well, one helper function specifically, that will be an add item function. Now, the first thing we need to do is create an inventory size, which we can export here. So we'll do 9, and the reason we'll do 9 actually is, you'll see in just a second. What we'll do here is we're also going to go to our grid and create a grid by getting node grid. So if you recall, over here we just have the grid, so I'm just going to get the node and load it essentially. Now, in our inventory size, what we're going to do is we're going to actually, we're going to change this to 24 and pop this out again. And what we're going to do is we're going to add our ready function, and we're going to for I in inventory size. And then inside of this, what we're going to do is we're going to create the slots. And we do this by saying slot is equal to inventory slot.new. And that's it. We have now created an item or a node specifically. Now you might think, okay, well, the next thing or step is to, well, just add the child to the grid. So we can say grid.addInChild slot. Okay, now this is cool, but if you recall, in our slot, we actually have an initialize. So we need to initialize or call that initialize function when we're creating it. And what we're going to do is we're going to simply pass through the slot.init, the item data, the type.main. So we're going to tell this slot that, hey, you're a main slot item. And then we're going to give it a size 32 by 32. Now you might be remembering or recall, why did we export this? Well, if we actually go over here and add a slot, which we can do, we can actually go to type and change this to main or misc, or if you have other ones that are like head or arm or whatever, that's where you can do that. So this is a dynamic slot that can also act as an equipment system. Now, of course, again, if you want to check out how to do that, I have some courses on it. I think I have some on my channel and some on my website. Definitely check those out, and I hope to see you there. Now, next on our agenda is to create the add item function. The add item function is going to pass through a string, so the item name, and then we're going to pass through or find that item and create it. So what we'll do here is we're going to create an item first. We're going to pass the item into inventory item.new, and then we're going to initialize it, because if you remember all the way over here, there is again an initialize function. What we'll do is initialize it by saying game.items of this item name. The problem is, what is games? What is this? Well, game is going to be a global function that we create. So let's do that right now. Let's go to our scripts here. Open up scripts, and we'll create a global folder over here. So we'll create a global folder. And in this global folder, we'll create a new script called game. Now, in this script over here called game, we're going to simply add this little guy called items. We're going to preload our resource tomato, which the path might be wrong. So let's reload that in. And we simply need to preload it like so. And that's it. So make sure the path is correct. Make sure that this is a dictionary. So a dictionary is going to have a colon in the middle, which essentially this is the key to this thing. So that's how it kind of works. I'm not going to go too in-depth on dictionaries. I actually have a video on it if you guys want to check that out. Again, it's on my channel for free, so do check it out if you don't find, or if you find dictionaries a little confusing. All right, now back to the main, or actually back to the actual script itself. Now we have the game script, but we need to globalize it. And how do we do this? Well, if we go to project settings on the top left, you can find the globals or auto load. Now, they just changed this recently in 4.3. So if you're on an older version, you might see auto load. But the idea is the same over here. So you'll see auto load over here and the path. So we need to find the path of the script that we just created. So let's find it, double click, and add on the right-hand side. Now you'll see that it's been added to my game. And if I go to my main and I save, you'll now see this script or the game has turned into a light green. This means I can now essentially call the game from anywhere in my game or anywhere. So any script, I can always just say game, and I can refer to the script. You can see it says .c. That means it is a script. I'm referring to the items. All right, now what else do I need to do in here? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if the item is stackable. Now, the reason we do this is because, well, if it is stackable, there's a lot of things we need to check for. Now, if it's not stackable, it's actually pretty easy to add an item. So what we'll do is we'll do that first. What we'll do is essentially we're going to for I in the inventory size. Then if we find, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find that item. If we already have that item, or if we, sorry, let me actually take that back. What we're trying to do is we're trying to find an empty slot. So to find an empty slot, what we need to do here is check to see if the get child I, right? So as we loop through that inventory size from 0 to 24, we're going to get the child of the grid, so the slot, and see if that child of the slot is 0. If it is 0, that means the slot is empty. If I find an empty slot, I will simply say grid.getChildI.addChild. Now this is it, and this is done, but to make this a little bit more efficient, I'm simply going to break if this becomes true. If I find an empty slot in the beginning of my loop, I don't need to continue looping. I can just break, and this will break out of the loop. Okay, now this is cool. We have this. This is going to be helpful to understand. Let's continue from if it's stackable. Now, if our item is stackable, well, first what we'll do is we're going to for loop I in inventory size, but as we loop through it, there's a few things we need to check for. The first thing that we need to check for is if there is an item. If there's an item in the slot, well, what do we need to do? Well, we need to check if that item is equal to the item that I'm trying to add. Right? So if my item over here is equal to the child item, then, well, I need to check for that. So this should be an if statement right here. If grid.child is equal to the item data. If that item data is equal to the data, right, so the child of the slot is equal to the data that I'm trying to add, or the item I'm trying to add, well, I don't need to actually add an item. I simply need to add to the count. So I'm going to get the child, the label, or sorry, the item, the data count, and then +1. Now, kind of gave away the next step, which is to update the label. So next, we need to update the label by getting the child I, get the item, and then get the label. So this is the label, if you recall. And then we're going to get the text, and then update the text by putting in the grid get child 0 data count. So this is the item count now. All right, lastly, if we did this, again, to make this efficient, I'm going to break. Now over here, we're going to add an else statement. To this one right here. So this guy, if it's less than 0, or if it's not greater than 0, that means we couldn't find an item, or we couldn't find that item in the inventory. So we'll simply add the item to our slot. And then if we do, we'll break. And that is essentially it. Now, let's see if we can give this a try and see if it works. So what we'll do is inside of our harvest, so let's close this up. Actually, first we should probably hit play and see if this works. Okay, cool. So we have our inventory, and we can see that it works, kind of. So we have some items. Now let's go over to our main, actually, and what we can do here is we can say simply add item tomato, because over here you have tomato. Now let's hit play. And now here we have our tomato that is an egg, and if we hover it, you can see tomato and the description. And I should be able to move it as well. So I can move it around in my inventory, and you can see here that if I drop it outside the inventory, nothing happens. That is because of our can drop function, remember? So again, we have a bunch of things that allow us to just check for things, and if we can drop it, etc. Right? So I do recommend you to actually try this on your own. We're not going to do this together. I'm going to encourage you to do this on your own. Try adding more than one item and test to see if that works. They should replace each other, and it should simply add items to itself. So I want you to essentially just add your own items, add 1 or 2 more items, another tomato, another whatever, I don't know, an egg, it doesn't matter, it's up to you. And try this yourself. So add it manually, but for now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this, as what we want to do, and we'll do this in the next part, is over in our player, our plant, .gd, I believe. Yeah, over here, we're going to add something that allows us to, well, add the item through harvesting. So we'll take a look at that in the last part, or in our next part.